Okay, we're going to move on now to 2.02 FY 2025 budget priorities, and I will send it back to Dr. Noonan.
All right, thank you, Chair Downs, and thank you again, Mr. Finneran. As you all know, at our last regular meeting, we did a presentation of our updated enrollment. We had an opportunity to hear from not just the Stephen Fuller Institute, but also shared with you some information around the Weldon Cooper Center, and that was sort of the kickoff of our, we're doing budget all year round, but sort of the kickoff of the budget. We have our upcoming meeting with the general government and with the city council members on December 4th at the high school, which will be really nice to host them. And then in January, I will present the superintendent's budget for your consideration. And this is the time of year when we typically ask you, are there things that you would like to make sure that we pay attention to as we start to head into the budget? And traditionally, there have been things in terms of priorities around compensation, class size staying small, good social emotional learning support. Those have been things that for the last several years we've really kind of paid attention to. And so my question for you tonight is really, one, given what we sort of know going into this budget, and I think what we know from at least what's in the newspapers now is that from the state's perspective, and based on the conversation tonight, the state's perspective, it's probably going to be a tight budget year at the state level. Traditionally, things have been fairly tight in the city of Falls Church as well. So I don't know what the amount of money is that we're going to have to spend, but we've had a chance to go out and speak with our principals who have met with their staff, and they've given us their sort of priorities, and I would love to just hear from you about what your priorities are, and if they're compensation again, they're compensation again. If they're keeping class sizes small, keep class sizes small, but are there other things that you'd like for us to sort of think about as we're putting our final development on sort of our budget? So I'll leave it there, and we'll just listen.
Yes, Ms. Tyson.
I just had a couple thoughts. Yes, I'm glad, obviously it's so much as a compensation, right? So I had two sort of compensation related questions. One, I know we did a lot of really great work that I think we all feel good about with the, with our pay scales last year and making sure that we were at market rate. I just always want to keep our eye on the lowest end of our pay scales and just make sure that we're keeping our eye out for anybody who's at the bottom rung, especially our hourly workers, and make sure that, especially with inflation and all of those pressures, that we're doing everything we can to just keep raising the floor. Let's see, the other one that was sort of related to compensation is just looking. We've heard some concerns about the class sizes or the staffing at the secondary level, and just making sure I know we've had some challenges being able to anticipate enrollment because I understand that there's there's a difficult way to predict how many kids are going to be in a class, and can't necessarily have two sections of a class just because there's 5 more kids who want to take it. And because we're so small, we can't just take a 0.2 from another school like other districts can. But I guess my question is just making sure that we're looking at the class sizes and the staffing levels at the secondary and the implication that summer school has on them. I know that has been a pressure the last few years, and making sure that we do whatever we can to anticipate the shift in how many kids are taking summer school and the impact that has on the staffing for the regular school year. And then my last thought was just on the security on the secondary campus. I know we have this big, beautiful building that we build as a community space and is being used as a community space, which is fabulous, but I know that puts a lot of strain on the staff at the secondary campus or just our school system in general, and making sure that is there anything else we could or should be doing to relieve that burden and make sure we're keeping our not just our campus safe, but keeping our staff there feeling supported and empowered that the campus is safe.
Great, thanks. Can I just respond to one thing? And I think this will be a conversation that we'll probably have to have as time progresses, knowing that we have a fairly tight budget probably ahead of us, and knowing that we actually are appropriately staffed at the secondary campus. But we do have those pressures of larger classes because we are running some classes that are really small. What some school divisions have done, including the one where I was as the head of instruction for a long time, was we would, not unlike college classes, it either makes or it doesn't make. We've done a lot to really create a circumstance where every kid who needs what they need gets what they need, including in some cases co-seating classes together, like language 3, language 4, language 5, or language 4, 5, and IB. But there are some other classes that are running at 10, 11, 12, 9, and if we have the support of the board to make those hard and fast decisions to save on some of the staffing so that we can keep the other class size sections down, knowing that going in would be really helpful. And we don't need you to respond to that tonight because that's later down the line. But I just wanted to put out there that, you know, it's hard when you start getting bombarded by the 8 parents who say they want computer science IB and to be able to step in and say, we just can't offer it. But that'll be a conversation for us to have to sort of coalesce around down the line.
I think that's a great idea, to just have the conversation and be as transparent as possible and just say, you know, we have to make a tough decision. Are we willing to have some classes at 30 plus so that we can have these 10 classes? Or do we need to, you know, and just making sure that it's out there and the conversation is open. And then I think at least the community knows, you know, how the decision was made. That would be really helpful.
Fair enough.
Thank you, Ms. Tice. Yes, Ms. Silverman.
Thank you, Chair Downs. I have a few ideas that I've just been thinking about. One, I know there was a shift in the recess time at the elementary. Is it just at Oak Street or Oak Street and Mount Daniel that went from 15-minute lunch to 30-minute lunch?
I'd need to look into that to
Okay.
make sure.
Okay, so I think that they now, from my understanding, they now have 30-minute lunches, and I think that's to give teachers a full 30-minute lunch break, which obviously I believe that we'd probably all support. But then it's the staffing of the recess at, you know, for the 15 minutes, which, you know, I've heard from a lot of parents that 30-minute lunch with a 15-minute recess is kind of lopsided, that they'd rather have a shorter lunch with a longer recess. And I think that, and I don't know, but is some of that because of needing to give teachers that 30-minute lunch break? So would the solution here to be to hire more recess help? And I think I remember that as a budget request last year or the year before was hiring more recess help. So if that's a solution to the issue that I'm bringing up of, you know, maybe possibly shortening the lunch break a little bit, but expanding the recess time, and maybe that means hiring more recess help and not requiring all the teachers to be outside for recess, that just might be something to look at.
Well, that is a great budget question, number one, because I do think it's a complicated question to sort of unpack. It's not as easy as, you know, giving teachers 30-minute duty-free lunch or 15 minutes of recess, because we're using some of our daycare staff, we're using others to cover those recesses along with teachers. So how about we take that and we put some meat on that bone and see if we can't get an answer to it.
I appreciate that. I won't even write that out in an email then for my budget questions.
I don't think you need to.
Number two, this might be a little bit premature because I know for first reading tonight, we have the early release for first reading, and if you know things progress, we'll go into a second reading, and it possibly might pass or not pass. But in the event that the policy does pass as written, I would also like to see if we could price out somehow what a daycare system would look like for after school on Wednesdays that would include fully paid for aftercare by the schools, along with transportation if we're only going to be offering that aftercare until 3:50 p.m.
Okay.
So that can get priced out. And then finally, something I've been thinking about, I guess, for the past couple of years, and I'm not the expert here. I'm going to leave the educational expertise to you. But I've just heard comments from many different people within the community about how East Sol is set up at the middle school maybe the high school too, I'm not sure, but I know for sure the middle school, by how some of the teachers, the primary teacher for a certain subject then also gets their ESOL certification, and we're piecing together the ESOL certifications to equal the amount of FTEs that we need. And I've had people question if that's the right structure. So that then becomes a budget issue if that's something that we reconsider and change the structuring of the ESOL program to include, to have ESOL only instructors rather than the basic subject, the English teacher also having a 0.2 or something. I forget what the exact numbers were.
We'd be happy to sort of talk about that at some point. I will just say my instinct is to begin talking about the value of ESOL teachers, general ed teachers getting their ESOL endorsement, because we teach ESOL in the content area, and when you have a content expert who's also trained in ESOL, it's like the perfect solution. As opposed to just having an ESOL teacher who's really good with strategies but doesn't know the content. So having that both and, my instinct is to start talking about that for a long period of time, and I'll just stop. But I would, we could talk about it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Silverman. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Dr. Anderson.
There we go. Greenlit. Thank you. So I would like to kind of reiterate my support for Ms. Silverman's idea of pricing out a daycare option with transportation, and kind of for varying levels of the number of kids. Just kind of have a good broad range of what it might cost for this level of support versus a slightly higher level of support. Mm-hmm. And then related to Ms. Silverman's questions on ESOL, I've heard similar things, and I think there's things to be said on both ways of structuring it. But I also wonder if having do our current kind of dual certified ESOL teachers get some sort of bonus for being ESOL teachers as well as general ed teachers?
Well, the bonus was that they had their endorsement paid for through a cohort that they volunteered to go through at George Mason. If they had enough, the coursework I think was 5 classes. 5 times 3 is 15, so those 15 hours could apply towards their service credit in the system. So if they're a BA plus 15, for example, they go up on the scale. But I would say as a rule, absolutely not. We want our teachers to be well-versed in instructional best practices regardless of who they're teaching, whether it's an ESOL student, a gifted student, or a general ed student, or a special education student. So having multiple endorsements simply makes you a better teacher. It shouldn't differentiate your pay. And that's why I actually think the structure that's being put in place, and we actually are starting a new cohort of ESOL with 7 new teachers, is the gold standard. And having simply standalone ESOL teachers is actually, in my opinion, a semi-antiquated way of providing ESOL services to our ESOL students.
Yeah, I guess I would say that if we are, we're obviously paying for training. I mean, I think that's been a benefit for not just ESOL, but for various things.
This is different. This was university credit. They went to George Mason through a cohort and took 5 classes. We paid for that. That's way beyond just sort of training that we provide.
Let me. I misspoke.
Yeah,
from what I understand, we have in the past paid for university credits for many things, not just ESOL.
Oftentimes through grants that we get from Virginia Tech, Virginia.
But that being said, if we are getting better teachers, and I would imagine that ESOL caseloads are kind of more work than just a kind of general ed, a general ed caseload. I would just say that if we're getting better teachers, we should pay them more. If you are a better teacher, you should get paid more. But when I ask specifically about ESOL, I know that they have an independent caseload of ESOL students on top of all their other teaching things. And so it seems that they might be doing a lot more, not just in terms of being a better teacher, but the actual work that they're doing. So I think if we're asking teachers to do more, then we should pay them more. That's all I'm thinking.
Okay. It sounds a little bit like, I don't want to get it wrong. So it does sound a little bit like there's some merit pay, a suggestion of maybe merit pay, or
Not really. I think,
if you're a
we're-
better teacher.
No, I think we're asking, so currently the way the ESOL system is set up, from what I understand, is that they have a general caseload, they have their general ed classes for, kind of the usual stuff, and then they have a ESOL caseload in addition to that. Is that correct?
If let's just take a middle school math teacher.
Yeah.
Let's say I've got 5 sections of math, and 2 of my sections have a small number of ESOL students that are in those 2 sections. And they've been co-located in there so that they get the best support possible and can support them. Yes, that teacher is the teacher of record for ESOL. And there is some additional work that goes with it, but it's not, one, it's not an extraordinary amount of work, and 2, this teacher specifically went through the training because they wanted to work with ESOL kids and knew sort of the deal going in, that there would be additional work with it. But the advantage, and again, it's for the students here, is that those students that are co-located in those 2 sections get the benefit of a content specialist in mathematics who also has training in working specifically with ESOL kids. So if you want to sort of talk about it, every one of our teachers in some way or another has an ESOL kid or a special education student or a free and reduced lunch student or in their classes somewhere. And I know that they may not have the casework for them, but they're asked to come to 504 meetings. They're asked to come to special ed meetings. They're asked to come to ESOL meetings, even though they may not be the teacher of record. So every one of our teachers in one way or another has an extra duty associated with the students that they serve. So I just am a little bit worried about like separating out, like if you're a special education inclusion teacher, for example, you're going to have, or if you're a general ed teacher with special ed kids in your class and you're invited to all of the IEPs because those kids are there, I wouldn't want to pay them more than another general ed teacher that doesn't have special ed kids in their class. I just think there could be some issues there, that's all.
Okay.
But I understand your point, and I think that's why we want to have the very best salary scales in the world.
Sure.
Or at least in Virginia, because we are putting together a package of resources for our teachers to get some endorsements that really helps our kids and does make them better ultimately at what they do. So I don't want to mischaracterize, and
No,
I'm not
yeah.
trying to be salty. I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah, no, that's all right. And then I guess it is going to be a tight budget, and I think there are probably more budget priorities from the other board members, and I think we also want to ensure that our teachers get paid, have the appropriate work conditions, kind of all the usual. I would encourage, but that being said, I would also encourage all to kind of think about where what programs that we have that may not be being utilized by a great number of students, and finding some cost savings in those programs, wherever that may come from.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Yes, Vice Chair Gould.
Yeah, I'm trying not to echo the usual. I know, Dr. Noonan, you mentioned that, but I'll echo the usual. The other, I would also echo Ms. Silverman and Dr. Anderson's point about aftercare for early release Wednesdays. I think that from an equity standpoint, I think that's the argument that we've heard from the community. And I think it would be excellent if we have resources dedicated to supporting families to have those slots available for early release Wednesdays, and a significant increase than what we provide now. I think the other priority that I would like to recommend to the board is a new position, a Director of Labor Relations. I think as this board has overwhelmingly supported collective bargaining when we voted for it, we are obviously learning about how this process is unfolding, and the FTE and the level of effort that's required for us to do this successfully. In conversations with multiple districts in Virginia, Chair Downs and I have had, there is a position. Usually larger districts have significant more FTE, but I think it'd be appropriate for us to have a Director of Labor Relations to support all of our efforts and ensure that we have a positive relationship as we move forward. So I'd like to advocate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Gould. Yes, I think that's right on. And I'll just add, of course, after Mr. Finneran, sort of some of the depressing news we hear about where Virginia falls in terms of funding and with the rest of the country and teacher pay, of course, we want to, as always, do all that we can to reward our teachers with benefits and salary. And, echoing what everyone said tonight, Ms. Tice's point about our lower paid part-time workers, so really all across the spectrum. I did want to, I guess, make a plug, actually ask you maybe first if you could talk a little bit, and for those who are listening tonight, about the assistant principal of student support at the secondary campus. It's my understanding that was a position that was temporary, and I know at our recent if you all remember when we were in chambers maybe 2 months ago, when the principals came and gave their school action reports at the end of the secondary report, Mr. Pickering and Mr. Laub very wholeheartedly requested that this board make that position permanent. And so I thought, Dr. Noonan, if you could maybe just say a few words about what that position is all about, especially for those who are listening who don't have kids at the secondary campus.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I'd also be happy to add into the Friday update this week the job description for that position so that you can get a chance to see it. This position, obviously, it's Rob Carey. I think everybody knows that. And sometimes positions are important based on who's in them, but this is a position that's slightly different. Obviously, Rob is doing a great job, and we really appreciate all his work. But coming out of COVID, we saw a couple of things happening. One was we saw some increase in student behavior concerns that were happening, particularly at the secondary campus, that were related to a lot of different things. We also know that in the Commonwealth of Virginia, one of the areas of emphasis this year in terms of accreditation is chronic absenteeism. And we're fortunate that we don't have a lot of absenteeism, but we do have some across our schools. And then looking at the social emotional learning of all of our kids and thinking about different ways to deal with discipline and attendance was something that we needed to put our heads together about. And what we ended up doing was developing this position to sort of attack some of those areas, particularly of emphasis. So some of the things that he does, one is serving as the administrative contact for all of the attendance concerns, works with the attendance administrators or administrative assistants, school social workers, school psychologists to address any kind of truancy or attendance issues. He tracks and monitors the student behavioral data at the school and is able to make some driven decisions about support for students and the like. Does provide reentry communications with school counselors and parents, social workers, if there is an attendance or a behavior issue. Really works, and I think this is where Mr. Carey's strength is as an administrator, works really hard on interpersonal relationships with the students that are sometimes the most challenged, and really is in a proactive way working with those students to try to get ahead of some of those behaviors that may start to crop up. Conducts also walkthroughs throughout the school to serve as just another highly visible adult, as a person who can be there. But also he participates in the Kid Talks, which are part of our process at actually all elementary, middle, and high, where we pull together the most important people in the lives of a kid and begin to talk about what are the needs of this kid and how might we meet those from multiple domains. One is academic, one is behavioral, one is social emotional. And so he's on those teams, and those are sort of some of the general duties. But there are the big things that he's done this year that I think are really making a difference, and I don't want to land too hard on the truancy, but I would land on some of the behavior stuff. We have seen a decrease in student behaviors this year. By this time last year, I think we were all swimming in discipline, and I can't say that Rob isn't a part of that. It's not causal, but it may be some sort of correlation of him being there and having his fingers on the pulse of what's happening. He's also been trained in restorative practices. So One piece that we're working really hard on this year that perhaps we didn't do as much with coming out of COVID that we wanted to do was sort of the restoration piece after there's an incident in school. So if someone's harmed or the school is harmed or whatever, bringing those kids back in and doing that restorative practice and process takes time. And Rob has now been trained along with Sarah Tennyson at the middle school to do these kinds of restorative practices with kids. And then he's also working really closely on two other things. And one is he is the Tier 2 interventionist. So if a student is struggling in class, he'll also pop into the class and work with students one-on-one to help them as needed. And then lastly, he's the equity lead on the campus as well. And to that end, he's made a really great place. He's picking up on this whole Mustang Pride piece, the No Place for Hate work that he's been working through as well. And has been serving that campus in that capacity. It's probably more information than he wanted, but he really has made already just a difference in terms of the tenor and tone of the campus, along with the change in leadership, I think, and then the volume of discipline and attendance issues has decreased. And we could certainly pull the data around that when we get closer to budget time. The other thing is we also will provide rationale. So if that's a position you'd like for us to consider, we can provide the rationale for why.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I can't remember in any recent time that principals in front of the school board have so openly advocated for a position. And two principals, at the middle school and the high school. So that speaks volumes to me. Of course, I've known Mr. Carey since he was a fourth grade teacher at then TJ. So I've known him a long time. I think part of it is that it's Rob Carey. But what I particularly love about this position is I feel a lot of times school systems are reactive, right? And you get sort of the why I think there's a lot of burden put on us to where were the red flags, especially you think about terrible things like school shootings and that sort of thing. And, I think there's just this sort of expectation that our schools should be on top of everything. And a lot of times schools come at it from a reactive position. And what I love about this is it's proactive. So this is someone who is really getting to know students, working with students, figuring out what kind of supports they need. If it's something that's happening at home, or something that's happening in the schools, what he can do to support these students. And so I just think it's terrific that we have someone in there who is helping students and is just a friendly person. I know my kids feel very welcome to approach Mr. Carey at any time with any kind of problem. And so it's just, it's one of those things, Dr. Noonan, that the quantitative data, if it's there, that's great. But I just think even if it's more qualitative in nature, just the whole, vibe that he brings to that campus and having a friendly face and someone that kids can turn to, I think is just really very important. So that was something I would like to advocate for in this budget, is making that position permanent. Anything else from anyone? Yes, Dr. Ortiz.
Thanks, Chair Downs. Just a couple of things from the perspective of the ESOL Advisory Committee. First, we would we support the continued support for the coursework and the supporting of cohorts through the ESOL certifications, as Dr. Noonan described. That is a best practice for delivery of services, and it's consistent with any other kind of services that we provide to students in need, the degree to which students are in content classrooms rather than pulled apart is better for them, and has been shown to be. We'd like to see the parent liaison be a full-time role. The parent liaison and the Family Resource Center provides a tremendous amount of support to the ESOL families, and it's a pretty intense job and one that's hard to do. It's one that's hard to do regardless, right? But it's hard to do as a part-time role. And then I think one thing we'd encourage, and this is not necessarily a budget discussion, is thinking through the kind of services that are provided and the degree to which those might need to be scaled across the division. What we hear is that, like as for example, just getting your kids registered, right, is, it's, not the hardest thing in the world to do. And, the rollout of it, I guess, on the day that school closes actually helps quite a bit in terms of reminding us to do that. But it can be a pretty big challenge, especially if you don't know English. But there's a lot of little details with respect to signing up for things and doing stuff and getting engaged with the classrooms and other things like that, that really just having someone to help. And so thinking through exactly how all the services are provided, certainly I think, having one person, a whole person helping to do that, but then also just thinking more broadly about all those services and how we make sure they're done is something that would be a useful thing to do. And then in addition, we heard from the counseling team as a committee, and we'd encourage, to the degree it's feasible, to ensure that a social worker and additional counselors are Spanish-speaking. And the reason why is actually just take somewhat of a load from the one counselor that gets a lot of the students at the secondary level, but also because being a multilingual learner is not a disability, but those students, just like anybody else, have other needs. And being able to make sure we can provide them with those. We do provide them with all, we do serve all those needs, but it would be a little less of a transaction cost if we were able to do that, directly. So, and those, again, those, that's, in some ways, I know that Dr. Noonan would love to be able to do all that. But those are the things that I think are important from the standpoint of the advisory committee.
Thanks. Sadly, we had a Spanish-speaking social worker a couple of years ago who went on to greener pastures. We tried really hard to keep her, but yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Ortiz. Great feedback. Thank you. Any other comments or suggestions? Okay. Well, this is, as you all know, the beginning of a long process, so we're starting it here. And we'll be meeting with the City Council on the evening of December 4th to talk with them and get some budget guidance from them. So more to come. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for your feedback.